The World Boxing Council has called for the establishment of a separate category for transgender boxers. Separately, rules come into force today from the World Triathlon Executive Board. It's decided to have a separate category for trans athletes based on testosterone levels. With me now is author and journalist Helen Joyce. Good afternoon, Helen.
Hi, nice to be on.
Yeah, nice to see you. So, Helen, is this a good idea, separate categories for trans athletes?
I mean, it's better than sticking people into the categories where they identify, but there's nothing wrong with just saying people compete according to their sex. Like, unless a woman has taken testosterone, there's no reason she shouldn't compete in the women's category. If she has, then she can't compete safely in the women's category. And by a woman, I mean any woman, a biological woman, no matter how she identifies. And if you try and make these separate transgender categories, the risk is you've got almost no athletes in them. And then you lump in the trans men or the trans women together. So basically, I'd just say we should compete according to sex in sport, because that's why we have separate categories. We don't have different categories for people who feel differently about their religion, or people with different eye colour or different hair colour or anything like that. Sex is just this big divide in physical attributes that requires us to have two separate categories. So yeah, I just don't think it's going to be manageable to have separate categories for transgender people as such, too small a number.
But the problem then is that, and also the different dictionary definition of woman now includes trans women, which is fine. I mean, if that's what they want to do, I personally wouldn't define it as that. I'd just define a trans woman as a trans woman and a woman as a woman. But the problem we are now facing, though, is that in many sports, in some sports, it has been acceptable for a trans woman to compete against a woman, and it is still going on in some places. And to me, and to most people around me, it seems blatantly obvious, but there's an elephant in the room that for some others they don't get it. I don't understand why people don't get it.
I don't really either. I think it's extraordinary. I mean, it seems to me that, anyone who has ever, any mother who's ever arm wrestled her 14-year-old son would know that you can't have women and men competing fairly and safely against each other. And I mean, we all know that in mammals there are two sexes, and that the sexes can't change. So I struggle, even after writing a book about these issues, I struggle at trying to explain to people what's going on, because it's so stupid. Obviously sport is about bodies. It's not about identities. Obviously it's about physical capabilities. We don't allow people to identify as under 18 when they're over 18 for sports purposes. We don't allow people to identify into the Paralympics. We don't allow people to identify into over 65s competitions. So why the hell do we allow male people to identify into female competitions? There's clearly a problem here. It clearly has to be sorted. Some sports have taken the necessary steps. Swimming is a notable first mover in saying that the female category is a closed category that is open, that is available only for female people whose birth certificate said female when they were born and who have not taken testosterone. And then everyone else can compete in an open category. That's the best solution.
I want to bring in my panel as well. So welcome to my panel, Helen. Helen's here. I've got... who are you again? No, it's Stephen.
I'm the silent one.
Yeah, he's the one with his mouth shut. So have you got a question for Helen? Have a chat with Helen about this, because you seem to think it's... What was your view on this transgender idea with these...
No, I think what they've done in swimming is actually very, very sensible, because who on earth is going to actually come forward into that other category? But look, I think the problem is we start with a basic premise where there's a dichotomy, where we think you're either one thing or the other, and then it gets muddy. And I think the point is that we cannot keep going into subdividing and subdividing and subdividing. I think there's men, there's women, and there's people who are transgender.
So they should, or Lois, should they have a separate category then?
Well, I thought it was very, very sensible, the boxing thing, saying that there should be a separate category. Yeah, because, and maybe, the pool is quite small, or they think it might be quite small, but maybe it won't be quite as small as people think.
Well, Helen said that, but Helen, you seem to think otherwise, that there shouldn't be a separate category. I think there should. If people are confused in terms of their gender and...
I want to know what they're going to do about people who claim to be non-binary. So a few sporting competitions have now offered prizes for, male, female and non-binary. And guess what? The male non-binary people beat the female non-binary people. So I just don't see that this is feasible. You can dance around this all you like, but the fact is that sport is about bodies, and bodies are about sex, not identity.
It is a good point that once you start going down this sort of hole, then you end up creating different categories. It's almost like the whole gender identity. So you've got is it? You've got air self, peer self, all the different.
I've not heard of that.
You've not heard of them. You've seen the gender, all the gender types. So
I mean, according to I think it's Facebook, there are 76 genders. So the thing is, it's not justifiable to have a separate category for men who identify as women or women who identify as men, because why would you have a separate category for these people? It makes no more sense than having, a Christian boxing category or something. It's not based on any material reality, and sport is about material reality of bodies.
Peter, have you got something to post to Helen with regard to this? You've been quite quiet about all this gender stuff.
Well, I'm learning a lot from this discussion, but I think the idea in swimming that you have an open category and a closed one is quite interesting. I'd like to learn a bit more about that, because I think whatever your conclusion, the starting point of discussion is that there's an unfairness in having someone born a man and someone born a woman compete against each other. And in something like boxing, there's a danger associated with that as well. So the idea of refining the categories but it still being a manageable number does seem quite sensible.
Yeah, it does. But let's face it, though, if it's the men will always win if they're against the women in most of the sporting categories. So to me, it's sort of slight bit of misogyny there as well. I mean,
not darts.
What am I wrong there? To me, it sort of smacks of a bit of misogyny.
Yeah, I mean, if you want women to have fair competition, you're going to have a competition that excludes all male people. And actually, funnily enough, we say in sports that there are male competitions and female competitions, but actually, usually the male competition is open to females. They just don't qualify. There's nothing stopping women from playing American football in America right now. They just never qualify. They're just not big and strong enough. So we actually do have closed category for female and open category for everybody in nearly every sport already. So let's just stick with that. And then we're not saying anything about people's gender identities. You can identify how you like.
Yes, it's true. Well, listen, Helen, thank you very much for joining us. That is Helen Joyce, she's an author and journalist, being perfectly sensible, saying perfectly sensible things. But unfortunately, when you say these things, you start getting called names. We're just being quite blatant about it.